I just finished making this tiny diorama. So stay tuned, I'm going to tell you the story behind it, my process, and I'll do a close-up reveal at the end. So until then, happy watching!
Step number one of this creation was to plan. Honestly, I can't tell you the last time I invested so much time into the planning of a project, but I think it was worth it because of the end result. I actually started sketching the individual components first and then created this thumbnail page to get an idea of how things would relate to each other inside the box. I also created the list, which you see on the bottom right in pink, so that I knew what components would be in the foreground versus the background. This was integral for making sure I got the sizing right for everything inside. Okay, so let's get into the sketches. I did most of the sketching off camera and I was going for a Mickey Mouse shorts look with this project. Those are the newer ones and they have the most beautiful backgrounds, so a lot of research was of the literal photographs of each place, but also anything that featured in the shorts that I could use as a reference. Honestly, I spent so much time sketching these cute palm trees and then they were a minuscule part of the project in the end. I took the time to draw most of the complex components several times to try different variations so I could capture the look I was going for. Once I had all my sketches sorted out, I went back to my planning pages and drew everything together again so I could see that it would all theoretically work once inside the box. Now, while this clip plays out, I will tell you how this project came about. In September of 2023, I went on a 23-day road trip down the West Coast with some of my family. We went as far as Anaheim, California, and we live in rural British Columbia, so it was a trek. It was also my third West Coast Disney trip and the longest one yet, so it brought a lot of excitement. We revisited places from previous trips, but we also stopped at places we'd never been before. On our way back up toward Canada, we stopped at a US local craft store and picked up a cute little wooden diorama box that I used for this project. My partner Ben and I thought we could make something to commemorate our trip, and after loving the new Mickey's Runaway Railway, wow that's a mouthful, ride at Disneyland, it became inspired by that stylization of Mickey's world, and thus this project was born. paper. I had 3 papers to choose from, and this mixed media paper ended up being my go-to. It was the thickest of the 3 I had on hand, and being mixed media, it could hold up against the acrylic gouache I was painting with. Peep those wonderful drawings that my sister did on this page. Alright, so time to paint. Please ignore the horrible paint leftovers on my palette, but of course I worked with a wet palette for this to extend the working time of the gouache. I used Holbein acrylic gouache, which I'm still learning to perfect, but it truly did wonders for the look of this project. If you don't know, acrylic gouache is really pigmented and smooth, and the finished texture is very soft and matte. After some tests on the paper, it was time to get into the painting of the actual pieces. I started by measuring the box and used the measurements to create the components that would be in the far back of the box, because then I could tier the other components in front of those. I didn't include a lot of sketching clips for the final pieces, but trust me, I did not freehand any of these. Once they were ready, I cut them out, mostly using an X-Acto knife because they were so small. And then I used a ruler and this Hera marker, which is actually a quilting tool, to mark 1/4 inch up from the bottom edge to create a base. And for a few of the components, I did a 1/8 of an inch edge on the side so they could sit nicely against the wall of the box. The first painting done. It was Hearst Castle, very breathtaking and quirky. I have no progress clips for this one, but Astoria column was next. Unfortunately, I get dizzy easily and I wasn't able to go to the top, but Ben captured some pretty great shots. After those two, I was able to paint some sky on the back panel of the box, including some fluffy clouds. Did for all of the components once they were cut out was paint the edges of the paper so that the white edge wasn't taking over once it was assembled. I feel like this really helped the objects feel less like they were just pieces of paper with paintings on them. And of course I had to include Sleeping Beauty Castle from Disneyland, my home away from home. It was Halloween time at the resort while we visited, so maybe I should have included a pumpkin, but I went with the OG castle instead. If you travel down through California, especially near the coast, you're bound to come by some of the redwood forests. This time we did Trees of Mystery in Klamath and the Avenue of the Giants, and we also stopped at Muir Woods, so we saw a lot of big trees. It was pretty fantastic. Up next was a stop that was pretty unexpected as we came across it as we drove along the Columbia River, which was a route we'd never taken before. That leg of the trip felt very mysterious, almost like we stepped into an alternate realm. However, the stop at Multnomah Falls and the entire drive was very picturesque. We finally got to spend more time in Solvang on this trip, and so of course I had to include a windmill. We stopped so many times along the Oregon and California coast, but a highlight was Yaquina Head Lighthouse. There's a nice visitor center there with a display on the history of the lighthouse. And I can't believe it, but we saw whales, which was a first for me, making this stop even more special. I think most people will recognize this iconic rock that's in Cannon Beach, Oregon, the famous Haystack Rock. It wouldn't be a road trip without the trusty car, my mom's Subaru, and the insane amount of luggage overflowing on the roof. It's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration as we did not have to resort to carrying anything on the roof, but I think my family would agree that it was pretty close. Next up was to paint the inside of the box, which I kept simple as to not distract from any of the standing components. Before I put anything into the interior of the box, I started work on the outside. I used cardboard and paper mache techniques to give the box a fun shape of a vintage TV, something like you would see stylized inside Mickey's house, although his TV is actually green, at least at Disneyland. Once I was done, I cleaned up the glass and it was time to assemble. I used trusty PVA glue to adhere all the components, and I ended up painting some of the bases once pieces were inside, just so I would know that there would be space for everything and the base paintings would be in the correct spots. For the castle, I had to add a brace, so to speak, because it would not stand up straight on its own. And at this point I thought I was done, but I had put off painting the Golden Gate Bridge because I didn't think it would fit nicely, but in the end I was missing a piece of the puzzle and I used Procreate to sketch it digitally to get the perfect design for the space. I love San Francisco, so I'm glad I pushed myself to add the Golden Gate. It is iconic California after all. The final step for assembly was creating the cute TV antenna. And now, here is the reveal. I'm so incredibly proud of how this came together, and I credit my dedicated planning and research for it. Of course, we had so much fun on the trip that I love being able to capture the wonderful places we visited inside a piece of art in my home. I added it to my Disney shelf, which I think is the perfect home for it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for tuning in.